The morning sun was still low when Flight 239 began boarding at Denver International Airport. The air inside the terminal was filled with the hum of rolling suitcases, the soft beeping of scanners, and the chatter of travelers hurrying toward different gates. Among the crowd was a small figure standing beside an airline employee, a girl no older than 12, wearing a bright yellow backpack and clutching a boarding pass with both hands. Her name was Emily Carter. She was traveling alone for the first time. The tag around her neck read "Unaccompanied Minor," printed in bold letters with the airline logo underneath. Emily's mother had walked her as far as the security gate earlier that morning, bending down to hug her tightly and whispering, "Be brave, Em, you'll do great." Emily nodded, even though her stomach felt like it was full of butterflies. She was going to Seattle to stay with her aunt for a few weeks while her mom finished a big project at work. When she stepped onto the plane, she felt smaller than ever. The aisle seemed long, and the overhead bins looked impossibly high. A friendly flight attendant smiled and guided her toward her seat, 17A by the window. Emily liked window seats. They made her feel like she was sitting in a moving castle above the clouds. She buckled herself in carefully, the way her mother had shown her, and looked outside as ground crews loaded luggage and fuel trucks hummed nearby. A man in a gray suit sat next to her, already reading a newspaper. Across the aisle, a young couple whispered excitedly about their honeymoon plans. Behind her, a little boy kicked his seat rhythmically while his father tried to calm him down. Everything felt ordinary, normal, safe. When the plane began to roll down the runway, Emily pressed her hand against the window. The engines grew louder, the plane lifted, and Denver slowly became a patchwork of lights and roads below. She smiled to herself. "Seattle, here I come," she whispered softly. For the first hour, the flight went smoothly. The captain made short announcements, the flight attendants served orange juice and pretzels, and passengers settled into their books, tablets, or naps. Emily listened to her favorite songs on her small music player, watching the clouds drift by like floating mountains. She loved airplanes, not just because of how high they flew, but because of what her dad had once told her. Before he left 2 years ago, he used to take her outside at night to watch planes cross the sky. "See that one?" he would say, pointing to a blinking light moving steadily across the darkness. "Every plane up there is a promise, someone going somewhere that matters." Her father, Daniel Carter, had worked with the Air Force as a systems analyst. He wasn't a pilot, but he knew a lot about how airplanes talk to each other through signals and satellites. He used to show Emily pictures of radar screens, explaining how the blips told stories of distance, speed, and direction. She didn't understand most of it, but she remembered how his eyes sparkled when he spoke, and she remembered his call sign, Falcon. He said it was given to him because he could see patterns no one else noticed. Then one day he didn't come home. Emily was told he had gone missing during a classified assignment overseas. Her mother never spoke about it again. She only said, "He loved you more than anything." And so Emily kept that love alive in small ways, by memorizing the names of planes, learning how radios worked, and reading every aviation book she could find. As Flight 239 continued west, small clouds began to gather outside. The seatbelt sign blinked on. The captain's calm voice came over the speaker. "Ladies and gentlemen, we may experience a little turbulence ahead. Please remain seated." Emily didn't mind. She liked the way the plane bounced slightly, like a gentle roller coaster. The man beside her tightened his grip on the armrest, though, and Emily smiled politely. "It's not too bad," she said kindly. He laughed nervously, but somewhere far below in Idaho's wide skies, something else was happening, something Emily couldn't see. At a control center hundreds of miles away, air traffic controllers were staring at a blank spot on their radar screens. Flight 239 had suddenly stopped responding to messages. Normally, planes send tiny signals every few seconds to confirm where they are. Now silence. Controllers tried again. "Flight 239, this is Seattle Center. Do you copy?" Nothing. They checked their systems. No error. Weather was clear. Other planes nearby were communicating fine. That meant the issue was with Flight 239. Following standard safety protocol, the Federal Aviation Administration sent an alert to the nearest Air National Guard base. Within minutes, 2 F-22 Raptor jets were prepped for scramble. Their mission simple: intercept the silent aircraft, make visual contact, and ensure everything was okay. The pilots were two experienced officers, Captain Ryan Hale, call sign Hawk, and Lieutenant Sophie Reed, call sign Ghost. They were partners for nearly 4 years, known for their precision and calm judgment. When the call came in, they suited up instantly, running toward their jets under the rising hum of engines warming up. Back in the sky, Emily had no idea of any of this. She was now reading a small book about astronomy and occasionally glancing at the flight map on the screen in front of her. It showed a dotted line stretching across the northwest of the United States, with a tiny airplane icon crawling slowly along it. She noticed something odd, though. The map flickered for a second, then froze. A few seconds later, it disappeared entirely, replaced by a blank blue screen. She frowned. That's weird, she thought. She tapped the edge of the display, but it stayed blank. A flight attendant walked by checking seatbelts, and Emily decided not to bother her. But then she heard something else. A faint static sound from the speaker above her seat. Not the usual announcement static. It was sharper, quieter, almost like a whisper of electronic snow. She looked around. No one else seemed to notice. The man beside her was asleep, the newspaper slipping from his hands. Emily leaned closer to the armrest where a small headphone jack was located. Her father had once explained to her how, in an emergency, planes could still communicate using backup frequencies. She didn't know much, but she remembered a few key buttons from pictures he had shown her, including one labeled "COM Override." Curious, she looked toward the back of the plane. Near the galley, she could see a small maintenance panel half hidden behind a curtain. It wasn't locked, just marked crew access only. She hesitated. She wasn't supposed to touch anything. But something in her heart told her this was important. The static grew louder for a moment, then stopped completely. The silence felt heavier now. Meanwhile, the two F-22 jets had taken off, streaking across the sky at high altitude. Inside their helmets, the pilots monitored their radar screens and listened to updates from command. The voice of the operations officer came through. Hawk 1, Ghost 2. Target aircraft identified as civilian. Flight 239 out of Denver. Scheduled for Seattle. Last contact 37 minutes ago. Proceed with intercept. Copy, said Captain Hale. ETA 4 minutes. As the jets accelerated, sunlight flashed off their wings like blades. From below, they would have looked like two silver arrows cutting across the blue sky. Suddenly, a second message appeared on their communication display. A short, encrypted text from Defense Intelligence. Captain Hale opened it. The moment he read the first line, he frowned. It said, "Passenger manifest note. Emily Carter, age 12. Possible code name, Falcon." Lieutenant Reed's voice crackled through his headset. "Hawk, did you just see that?" "I did," he replied quietly. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" Reed hesitated. "If it's that Falcon, then this isn't just a lost signal." They didn't say more. Protocol prevented them from speculating aloud. But both knew the name wasn't random. The codename Falcon was tied to an intelligence file marked Restricted Access, a system analyst who vanished under unclear circumstances 2 years earlier. The file had been sealed at the request of multiple agencies. Now, somehow, that same name was attached to a child on a commercial flight that had gone silent. Inside Flight 239, Emily finally unbuckled her seatbelt. She told herself she would just peek at the panel and then go back to her seat. When she reached the galley, she glanced around. Everyone seemed distracted by the flight attendants handing out drinks. Carefully, she pulled the curtain aside and knelt in front of the small door. It wasn't locked, only latched. Behind it, she saw a few switches and a tiny display screen glowing faintly. She had no idea what most of the symbols meant. But one label caught her eye. COM Channel B. It reminded her of the diagrams her dad used to draw when explaining backup systems. She took a deep breath and pressed the small round button next to it. The screen flickered, showing a line of green numbers. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a faint voice echoed through the tiny speaker. "This is flight control. Flight 239, do you read?" Emily's heart skipped. She leaned closer and spoke softly. "Hello? This is Emily. I'm on Flight 239. I don't think the captain can hear you." There was a long pause. Then the voice came again, slower, gentler now. "Emily, can you tell me where you are on the plane?" "In the back," she said. "Near the kitchen." I think something's wrong with the radios. The controller sounded surprised but calm. You're doing great, Emily. Just stay right there. Help is on the way. Outside the windows, faint shapes appeared on the horizon, 2 fighter jets closing in fast. Passengers began to murmur, pointing at the sleek planes flying beside them. The sunlight outside was turning soft and golden as Flight 239 crossed over the last stretch of the Rocky Mountains. From her window seat, Emily Carter watched the 2 F-22 jets gliding beside the plane like silent protectors. Their silver bodies shimmered against the pale blue sky, moving so smoothly it looked like they were dancing. She didn't know exactly why they were there. All she knew was that for a few minutes, the world inside the plane had gone strangely quiet, and somehow she had helped the pilots on the ground hear them again. The man beside her closed his newspaper, shaking his head in amazement. Never seen anything like that, he whispered. Those fighter planes look serious. Emily smiled shyly but didn't answer. She was still thinking about her dad, about how he used to talk about fighter pilots with deep respect. They don't just fly fast, he once told her. They protect people who can't protect themselves. Now, seeing those very planes guarding her flight, she felt a tiny spark of connection to him again. The captain's calm voice came through the speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, the Air Force jets you see outside are simply verifying our communication systems. Everything is safe. Please stay seated as we continue our approach to Seattle. A soft wave of relief moved through the cabin. People smiled again, a few even clapped quietly. The flight attendants went down the aisle, reassuring passengers and checking seatbelts. Emily noticed one of them, a tall woman with kind eyes, and stopped by her row. Are you doing all right, sweetheart? She asked. Yes, ma'am, Emily said. I was a little scared, but I'm okay now. That's my brave girl, the attendant replied, squeezing her hand gently. In the cockpit, the 2 pilots, Captain Ryan Hale and Lieutenant Sophie Reed, listened to the control tower's updates. The main radio was finally back online. The tower confirmed that a young passenger had used an emergency panel to help them reconnect. When they heard her name, both pilots exchanged a look through their visors. Emily Carter, Hale repeated softly, codename Falcon. I can't believe it. Reed adjusted her controls and aligned their formation perfectly beside the airliner. Do you think she knows? She asked. I doubt it, Hale said. She's just a kid. But it's strange, isn't it? A girl with that name doing exactly what her father was famous for, fixing signals. Almost poetic, Reed murmured. For a few moments, neither spoke. The hum of the engines filled their helmets. Then Hale radioed the flight's captain, confirming that the aircraft was stable and cleared to continue to Seattle. The fighter jets would escort it until landing, just to be safe. Inside the cabin, Emily leaned against the window again. Her reflection stared back at her, a small face framed by light brown hair, eyes filled with curiosity. She wondered if her dad could see her right now, if he'd be proud. She imagined him smiling that gentle smile he always had when he explained something complicated. You've got the heart of a pilot, Falcon, he used to say, tapping her nose. You see the world differently, not from the ground, but from the sky. She had always thought Falcon was just a nickname. A secret between them. Now she wasn't so sure. The plane began to descend slowly, tilting slightly as it approached the coast. Emily watched the clouds thin until patches of green forest and blue water appeared below. Seattle was near. The passengers around her started gathering their belongings, stretching, chatting softly. Everything seemed to return to normal, except for the quiet mystery humming at the edge of Emily's thoughts. Meanwhile, at the Airbase Control Center, analysts were busy reviewing what had happened. Messages flashed across screens, data lines filled with coordinates and timestamps. Communication blackout lasted 12 minutes, one technician reported, then re-established through backup channel, initiated by passenger Emily Carter. The supervisor raised an eyebrow. 12 years old? Yes, sir. Unaccompanied minor. Manifest confirmed. He leaned back in his chair, impressed. That's some kid. Another officer looked up from her console. There's a note attached to her family file. Her father, Daniel Carter, was the systems engineer who designed that same emergency override protocol. The room fell quiet for a moment as realization set in. So she didn't just get lucky, the officer said softly. She used something her father created. Back on Flight 239, the final part of the journey felt peaceful. Emily unwrapped a chocolate bar she had saved from the snack service and offered a piece to the man beside her. He smiled gratefully. "You're very kind," he said. "Thank you," Emily replied. "My dad used to say sharing makes turbulence smoother." The man laughed gently. "Smart man." The captain made another announcement. "Folks, we've been cleared for descent into Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. Please fasten your seatbelts. We'll be landing shortly." Passengers clapped again, this time out of simple relief and joy. Emily's heart beat faster as she felt the plane tilt downward. Outside, the fighter jet stayed close, shining like guardians against the sunset. She pressed her forehead to the glass and whispered, "Thank you," not knowing if the pilots could somehow hear her. Captain Hale did see her, though, the small figure by the window, a flash of yellow from her backpack strap. He smiled inside his helmet. "She's waving," he told Reed. Reed looked over. "She's got courage. Most adults would be panicking, and she's waving at us. She's her father's daughter," Hale said quietly. "Falcon lives on." As they neared the airport, they received clearance to break formation. Hale's voice softened. "Ghost, you take lead out. I'll hold position till touchdown." "Copy that," Reed replied. She angled her jet slightly upward, saluted the airliner with a gentle wing tilt and soared higher, disappearing into the glowing horizon. Hale stayed a few moments longer, flying parallel to the passenger jet until its wheels touched the runway. Then with one last glance, he banked right and returned to base. The landing was smooth, the kind that barely shakes the seats. Applause filled the cabin as the plane slowed down along the runway. The flight attendants smiled, and even the captain came out to greet the passengers once they stopped at the gate. "Thank you for your patience today," he said. "We had a small technical issue, but everything is fine now. You all were wonderful." Emily stood up carefully, adjusting her backpack. The same kind flight attendant who had checked on her earlier came by again. "You did amazing, sweetheart," she said softly. Emily blinked, surprised. "How did you know?" The attendant winked. "Let's just say the cockpit heard about a certain brave little helper in the back." Emily blushed and looked down. "I just pressed a button," she said quietly. "Sometimes pressing the right button at the right time saves a lot of people," the woman replied kindly. When they reached the terminal, Emily followed the crowd through the jet bridge. On the other side waited a cheerful woman waving her arm. Her Aunt Rachel. "Emmy," she called, rushing forward to hug her tightly. "Aunt Rachel." Emily laughed, nearly dropping her backpack. "Oh, I'm so glad you're safe. Your mom was nervous letting you fly alone," Rachel said, still holding her. Then she noticed something in Emily's eyes. A quiet glow, a kind of calm beyond her years. "Everything okay on the flight?" Emily nodded slowly. "Yes, it was. Different. But good," Rachel smiled. "Well, come on. Let's get your luggage." Out on the tarmac, the F-22 pilots had already landed and parked their jets. Inside the base hangar, Captain Hale removed his helmet and sat on the edge of his cockpit, watching the sunset fade over the horizon. Lieutenant Reed walked over, holding 2 bottles of water. "You still thinking about the kid?" she asked. "Yeah," he admitted. "You? Of course. You don't meet someone like that every day." Hale took a deep breath. "You know, we could file a small note in the system. A commendation for a civilian," Reed smiled. "Why not?" "She deserves it." They both laughed quietly, then walked toward the operations office to write their report. Later that night, as Emily sat in her aunt's living room with a warm blanket and a cup of cocoa, the TV in the corner played a news segment. Earlier today, a commercial flight from Denver to Seattle experienced a brief communication issue mid-air. Thanks to quick coordination with the Air Force and the assistance of a young passenger, all 142 people landed safely. Authorities confirmed there was no danger, and systems have been fully restored. Rachel looked at her in surprise. "A young passenger? That couldn't be." Emily shrugged, pretending to sip her cocoa. "Maybe," she said softly, her cheeks turning pink. Rachel smiled and pulled her close. "You really are your father's daughter." Far away at the Air Force Base, an officer typed a short update into a secure system. The file name, Carter, Emily, and Falcon Line. The note read, "Assisted in airborne communication recovery using secondary system. Demonstrated exceptional calm and initiative. Recommendation, keep record active." When he hit save, The system quietly added a new line under her father's old file. Codename Falcon. Status: active. The next morning, sunlight poured into Emily's room. She woke early, the memory of the flight still fresh in her mind. Her aunt had promised to take her to the Space Needle that day, and she was excited, but her thoughts kept returning to the sky. She walked to the window and looked up. Somewhere out there, the pilots who had flown beside her were probably already on another mission, protecting someone else. She whispered softly, "Thank you, Hawk. Thank you, Ghost." Then, after a pause, she added, "And thank you, Dad."